the plenty, we get to choose our consumption, our dietary habits. Starvation never crosses our minds, not in this world, not in these times. And we put our full faith in our governments that they never seek to do us harm. They would never wrong us. So how do we prepare for the impending days of starvation in times ahead of us? And who will come out unscathed when food becomes obsolete? In this day and age, many Americans can afford excess to put away, to stockpile food, go to the grocery stores every 2 or 3 days, belch out at the kitchen table, declaring that we're full, that we're absolutely stuffed and cannot take in another bite, then waking up in the morning to take out that trash on Wednesday, an astounding 40 billion tons a year. We rarely experience the suffering that the 793 million people going without. No, we get to have the plethora of choices to overconsume, eat healthy, take in supplements, diet, get in shape, all these luxuries that we take for granted. We get to choose. There is a lot that do not. And despite what certain groups of people would say, very few are starving in America these days for those who seek out help. Simply put, starvation never crosses our minds. The arrogance that this could never happen to us in this country, in this Western world, that immoral leaders could intentionally cause a starvation situation by many and any means, and when they chose to do so. Mandated policies, fees that enforce the inability to buy, sell, or trade, supply shortages intentionally created, initiating transportation problems, false environmental catastrophes, and natural disasters. Migration are just a few to mention of means and ways in which, in the past, governments have induced starvation upon their people. They could be manipulating the system, sending everyone in the country from living in excess to begging in the streets. You see, out of all the things we talk about as preppers, starvation is one of the 3 factors that could possibly happen, one that you should prep for. Governments have in the past starved their own people in the millions through enforced poverty, declining economical collapse, geographical factors, the distribution and lack of distribution of wealth across the broad spectrum of civilizations, for political interests, and sometimes when people are migrating from place to place, starvation is inevitable. Starvation comes from many factors, and the seriousness of supply shortages is real. And we are even seeing these supply shortages happening right now before our eyes for those who open their eyes to actually see it happening. The muscular, the obese, the undernutritioned and average, who can really disengage from a world of excess. Those who are starving unwillingly know that feeling, that sharp prick, that sting in the stomach begins to cannibalize itself from within. These people, the homeless, they endeavor upon the frail edge of woe, existing betokened of things to come for the rest of us. Those who have practiced control in consuming foods have a chance because they have disciplined themselves, perhaps even pushed themselves to the limits of physical exertion on minimal caloric intakes. They may stand a chance when the supply chain dwindles to nil. More importantly, these who practice minimal caloric intakes may have a chance. They will be the last breed of people who maintain an ethical means of gathering food or acquiring provisions. The homeless may even stand a chance because of the skills they've learned upon living in the streets. Their dystopic views of the world has already allowed them to peer deeply into the tragic future of our country and become humbled. There are many effects that starvation does upon the body. In 1941 to 1947, Minnesota conducted an experiment. Tests were conducted on deserters in the military who didn't want to go to war. And these experiments were to analyze the cardiovascular, physiology, temperature regulation, metabolism, nutrition, aging, and cardiovascular epidemiology. Over 400 men volunteered for this experiment. During this 24-week study, or starvation phase, each participant lost an average of 25% of body mass of their pre-starvation body weight, and the results of starvation resulted in depression, hysteria, social withdrawal and isolation, decline in concentration levels, comprehension and judgment capabilities were lost, long-term health effects, organ failure, and even death pursued after these studies. Some people attempt at mastering the mind, others the spirit, and some a bit of both, but there are some that believe that survival is predominantly physical. And so smart preppers take really good care of themselves, exercising, eating right, taking supplements, working out, knowing that one day, perhaps one day, that they will be put to a test. However, remember that being physically fit is a luxury afforded to us in good times, and exercising is a fairly new concept developed about the same time as the pharmacy industry, and coincidentally about the same time humans became weaker in all aspects of life. But believe it or not, being healthy, it could lead a person into a false sense of safety or a false sense of security. We need to realize that there are many factors involved in self-preservation besides the physical. Is the pen truly mightier than the sword? Does the strongest only survive? Two contradicting thoughts. Could it even be possible that only the smartest of the strongest survive? But what happens when the supply chain fails and everyone is now unexpectedly shorted ability to choose what they have freely enjoyed for so long? So, I realize there's a lot of you out there that say, well, I'm in shape. Starvation isn't going to really affect me because I have lots of calories to burn. Well, you see, in my occupation, I get to see through a partitioned eye or window of grown men getting jacked like it's their sole purpose is to gain muscle mass in pursuit of becoming enormous. Trust me, I can see the ability, the wanting, and the necessity of being jacked in hand-to-hand combat, man against man, no weapons involved. Yes, being physically enormous has its advantages, but we all know that nowadays at a gun, a giant man can be dismissed from far away, basically neutralizing any advantage of being enormous. I often ponder a starvation situation where people are laying on the streets dying, stomachs empty. How would an individual who's been working out daily, consuming 4,000 calories of food a day, how are they going to maintain these calories in a supply chain crisis? How is an obese person who's been feeding themselves 4 or 5 times a day, how are they going to be affected in a starvation situation? How is someone that does not eat any calories, they eat the bare minimum, they're just eating to maintain mental and to continue their heartbeat pumping? How are these different individuals going to survive a supply chain collapse in a world without law, in a world slowly running out of resources? Are they going to acquire food from others, procure at any cost? How many acres would you have to grow of food to maintain your current eating habits? Is it even possible in this day and age? If you choose to attain calories in an honest, ethical way, will the muscular fit or the obese ultimately be the last man standing because of the surplus stores of calories they have on them? Or will they be the first men to crave flesh, to ultimately become the first cannibals? Let me use an analogy. I see all these huge trucks out there, these F-150s, right? Will it be all these F-150s running the roads, ruling the highways, or is it going to be the Priuses and the motorcycles with high gas efficiency that will be ultimately running the show? I'm almost certain that we're going to see a lot of F-150s on the side of the highways, empty of their tanks, primed for the looting. When the gas wells run dry, I can almost and cannot help but envision the hungry in mass looking and finding their meals in a drained, once walking fortress of a man, and just like the out-of-gas F-150 stranded aside the road, he will be an easy picking for the insatiable appetites of the desperate and fraught. You see, essentially, we have fattened ourselves up in good times to become the next cattle pen of livestock in the eyes of an impending dystopic generation of man-eaters. I know, great thoughts, right? I've told you I'm a realist, right? So let's get off this part of the story and let's talk about how we can prepare for starvation. There are a lot of people in these days that refuse to practice caloric intake or fasting simply because they believe that while the supplies are here, we should be enjoying them. So they go without practicing. If you really want to prepare for starvation situation, here are some opinions or options that I have for you. To prepare for starvation, you almost literally need to starve once in a while. Go to bed hungry, skip a meal once in a while. I mean, if you sincerely declare yourself as a true hardcore prepper and you prep for everything else, you go out to the firing range, you practice emergency drills, but you don't ever practice for starvation situation. You need to experience a little hunger to even know what you're up against. One of the things you can do right now to ensure that you can make it a little longer than the rest is preparing to buy food and supplies now. Stock up on all that stuff now while the getting is easy. If you have the land or the property, you can have livestock. That it's a great option to have when the supply chain fails. You should always stay up on the information. The Food and Agricultural website, they will let you know where there's been crop failures and supply shortages throughout the world. They put out a monthly review on this, or it's bi-monthly, and keep up on this news, because you might know about things before the rest of the world will, because you know how the media is. They don't want to produce a panic. So we may be in turn the last ones to find out if crops have failed in our own country, or if that supply of yams aren't coming up from South America this year. You'll be ahead of the game. Starvation, period. When people are hungry in your neighborhood and they're starving, the last thing you want to do is to fire up those steaks and have that smell permeate the neighborhood, or you will be attracting the hungry. Is what I suggest you do, is cold soak your food in starvation periods. Cold soaking just means putting your food in a jar with water and letting it rest. There will be no food smells permeating the neighborhood. They won't be coming out of your house, and it won't be a signal that you have what others do not. Of course, limiting your calories once in a while is a great option, just to get your body used to not consuming so many calories each day. And this also allows you to analyze yourself, your body, and see what you can actually live off of and still produce and function and do work and exercise off these minimal amounts of calories. Besides fasting, you could limit your caloric intake, like I said, on a daily basis. Now, if you're trying to gain muscle, or if you're just obese naturally, this may be very hard to do. But it is discipline. It is something that you're going to have to reach deep inside your spirit and your mind and overcome. It's just like going to the gym, it's the opposite of going to the gym. You're reducing calories, you're reducing your intake, and you're actually forcing your body to do more off limited calories. And then we can look at the world. For instance, there are certain types of people, depending on where they live, their climate, that they naturally have smaller, slender bodies because of the limited calories that they're intaking, and they just simply don't need that much calorie. It's not like the desert dwellers who are tall and thin. They hunt all day, they eat mostly proteins and grains, And whereas you look at the Inuit or the old Vikings, they typically put on extra weight to add as a winter barrier for winter stores. It seems to me, and it might be just my opinion, that neither of these cultures could interchange and survive comfortably. They would both have their issues. If a thin, tall man went up to the Arctic, he would not have those stores to keep him warm, whereas a big, heavy guy in the desert might not actually do too well in that situation. Just remember, guys, that being physically fit is not a luxury that we're always going to be able to afford, nor sitting on the couch living a sedentary life, consuming extra calories more than the average Joe. And it is somewhere down the middle is where you want to be right now while times are good. Food shortages is something that probably will occur. And if you don't get your stuff together now, I'm afraid it may be too late. You don't want to be the guy that's hunting down others to feed your insatiable appetite. And we'll see you guys.